Martinsburg Roundhouse, Martinsburg, West Virginia. Once a great location for a rail yard, for both business and supply transportation, the Martinsburg Roundhouse still stands today after its closure in the late 1980s. The history has been very well preserved thanks to the state of West Virginia, allowing guests to experience the past hands-on and in person. The location has been steeped in history from the enduring days of the Civil War to the beginnings of the Great Railroad Strike. The beautiful brick structure rests behind abandoned railroads and within a large rail yard campus, which, aside from its location, could still be in use today if necessary. The unique designs call for architecture and engineering students to witness the great feats of the past and hope for an even better future. History also pulls students into the fold, allowing them to study both wars and economics simultaneously. After all, those who don't learn from the past are bound to repeat it. This is a lesson that could be hard-pressed to recognize, as it's very possible some stray energies and entities from the past are still trapped inside the Roundhouse. Some say that citizens and soldiers alike are stuck here in Martinsburg, replaying the past for all eternity. The past. Martinsburg, West Virginia was a prime location for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad to expand into as they grew through the young but blossoming country. In the early 1840s, the very first engine shops and machinery were constructed to allow B&O to open its railroad lines in the area. This brought a slew of jobs, which brought with it employees and their families. Up until West Virginia's secession from Virginia during the Civil War, Martinsburg was a hotbed for growing industries. Following the state's independence, its government and economy was thrown into chaos. The rail yard in Martinsburg became a major target for both the Union and Confederacy due to its location and efficiency of travel, which was a huge military advantage back in the days of the horse and buggy transportation. Overall, the Martinsburg Roundhouse changed hands nearly 50 times during the Civil War, but the tug-of-war truly began when Thomas Jackson, better known as Stonewall Jackson, stormed the railroad hub with his troops in May of 1861. The plan was to halt all train traffic from moving eastward. Once the army completely stopped all known trains, they proceeded to destroy bridges to the west and block the eastern tracks with rock slides caused by explosions. With this raid, nearly 40 locomotives and upwards of 300 train cars were destroyed or severely damaged. Approximately 40 miles of track, 100 miles of telegraph wiring, and 20 bridges were destroyed. The Confederate raid also led to the B&O station and the machineries to be significantly damaged. In mid-July of 1864, a back-and-forth battle broke out in the streets of Martinsburg. The main strategy was for the Union to attack the Confederate cavalry, which was stationed at the Roundhouse. As the Union attacked in waves, the Confederates fell back through the town. Amidst the chaotic fighting of the tight streets, the Union finally prevailed after a 3-hour battle, driving the Confederates out of the town for the final time. Martinsburg was decimated after the Civil War. The economy that was just growing took a huge hit and left the citizens without jobs and money. There was no way to export or sell goods. More importantly, there was no way to import necessities. A year after the war ended, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was granted a stipend from the newly unified government to rebuild their rail yard in Martinsburg. It took nearly 6 years, but the compound was rebuilt by 1872, most of which still stands today. The newly reconstructed roundhouse and machine shops breathed fresh life into the town, nearly picking it up where it left off pre-Civil War. The beginning of the railroad strike in 1877 actually started in the roundhouse in Martinsburg. The B&O Railroad cut wages of its workers for the second time that year. The striking workers refused to allow locomotives to leave, even if they were fully stocked for shipment. As the workers demanded the second wage cut to be withdrawn, the government was not backing down and sent in state militia to get the train service moving. These militiamen would not participate in using military strength to force the strikers. This forced the state to send in federal troops and remove the workers who used any means necessary, even physical and deadly force. The strikers moved out of Martinsburg but began to shut down nearby rail yards, forcing the governor to follow suit and have soldiers trail the disgruntled workers from city to city. With the limited resources, the strikers seceded, and the Great Strike only lasted 45 days. The majority of the reconstructed buildings were in usage until 1988, when business began moving out of Martinsburg. Vandals set fire to the eastern portion of the roundhouse, nearly decimating the structure. The remainder of the buildings fell into disrepair and became a danger to any trespassers. In 1999, the Berkeley County Commission purchased the property in order to transfer it to the state of West Virginia to solidify the campus as a historic rail yard and preserve the history for future generations. Paranormal experiences. The most common activity that is experienced is said to stem from the Civil War era. It's not just dead soldiers marching around. Rather, it's civilians who were caught off guard and lost so much during these awful and horrific years. Some soldiers are said to still be lingering after the fighting, but they are also said to be mechanics and clergymen who helped with the aftermath. There has been plenty of smoke or fog that has been captured and seen throughout Martinsburg Roundhouse. Some claim that this smoke is a replaying of gunfire and explosives from the Confederate destruction of the rail yard. Others believe that this is actually the form of some lost entities who were stuck in the roundhouse unknowingly. The energy and experiences are not just linked to the roundhouse itself, rather, the building and grounds. Some visitors claim that they can smell the burning of wood and feel instantly hot, as if right next to an open flame. Most likely energy left over from the flames that were caused during the destruction during the Civil War. Others smell tobacco and see what appears to be puffs of smoke given off by a cigar or pipe. Lilacs are another commonly smelled aroma. Those who would have died in the fields would have been covered with lilacs to cover up the scent of death exuding from the bodies. This was more to prevent the citizens, who still resided there, from getting sick and nauseous from the smells of dead bodies. Temperature changes have been recorded both inside and outside of the building. Some of these cold spots coincide with sightings of mist moving about the grounds, almost in the form of a walking person. The attic of the roundhouse has been known to be active with the odd-colored, foggy-looking apparitions. This fog expands from a small orb which has been experienced on numerous occasions. With this activity typically comes the aforementioned temperature drop, but only in specific locations. Odd feelings have plagued guests at the roundhouse. They almost share the last feelings of those who perished here or those who return after their passing. Some people experience extreme dehydration and become in dire need of water. This was typical of soldiers who were dying. Their last urge was to get a drink of water before passing away. Others have felt headaches and stomach aches, to the point that they needed to either leave the site or step outside and get some fresh air. These people were said to be in the direct presence of, or standing in the same spot as, an entity who wanted to be known. Whether it's a cry for help or a conversation, recorders have been known to pick up full sentences and clear communication. Others have snapped photographs of oddities which believers claim to be actual apparitions caught in images. Whether this paranormal activity is simply residual hauntings playing the past over and over, or apparitions who want help to leave this place and gain solace in a true afterlife. The Martinsburg Roundhouse has been active ever since its closure, after nearly 150 years of service, destruction, and raw history. Paranormal investigation. Combining all of these paranormal stories with the historic value of the location, we were more than excited to spend the night at the old roundhouse. A little after 7 o'clock p.m., we managed to weave through the town and find our way to the lower lot where the original buildings still stand. We were lucky enough to be greeted and toured by the fantastic Mike Giovanelli. Mike told us stories of his personal experiences and showed us some incredible photographs of the paranormal which occurred on site. We began setting up our cameras and equipment around 8 o'clock p.m. and began our investigation right around 9 o'clock p.m. We were given permission to stay until about 3 o'clock a.m., but ultimately wrapped up around 2 o'clock a.m., and spent some time with Mike and his wife Spring, and their friend Harris from Mid-Atlantic Paranormal Investigations, simply exchanging stories and hearing about their great adventures. During the investigation, we were joined by a medium and a first-time investigator. We utilized nearly all of our equipment, but with the location being so large, we were on the move a lot, and it took some time to set things up properly. We had 4 hardwired cameras set up in our monitoring system, 1 stationary camera, 1 handheld camera, 1 K2 meter, 1 SB7 spirit box, 1 Ovilus, 2 REM pods, one of which we left by the stationary camera all night, 3 recorders, 1 thermal camera, 2 IR lights, 1 temperature gauge, 1 EMF pump, 1 Phasma box, and 1 laser grid pen. During our walkthrough, we were drawn toward the bridge shop, in particular the upper floor, which is said to hold numerous spirits. One of the more predominant stories tells of a woman dressed in white pacing in the corner and along the adjacent wall. It's said that there used to be shelves in that area, and perhaps she used to work there, or was a slave there. She may have been tasked with sorting and keeping tabs on the inventory, and still does so in the afterlife. In the opposite corner of the floor, there is rumored to be a prostitute and 2 or 3 male spirits trapped here. The origin of this tale is unknown, but being a popular stop back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it's unknown what truly occurred in that area. This female spirit seems to attract and pull males toward her, and seemingly pushes women away. Another common sighting is that of an entity up in the rafters. There is no particular story associated with this, but rather mediums, psychics, and sensitives tend to see and feel a strong presence above them. In our first session in this area, we sat near where the woman in white has been seen, near her shelves, and recorded an EVP session. We did not capture much conversation-wise, but did hear phantom footsteps behind us in the opposite corner. Our Phasma box helped us truly open up communication here, as we felt we successfully captured greetings and names with hello, and the name Kayla appearing on the obelisk. This led to some unexplained phenomena in the form of laughter, followed by a deep breath, and even a captured scream. Some of the more intelligent forms of communication occurred as we discussed the area and the weather, all beginning with these spirits guiding us with a simple, "You should go." This was followed by garden.
Are you working outside?
And during this time frame, we also captured the word cold, which then paired up with a full phrase of "my hands are cold" through the Phasma box, after we asked if they were going to work outside, perhaps in a garden. This intelligence seemed to continue as we discussed which floor we were on, and heard the word platform, as if in direct reference to this area. After attempting some clarification asking if this was utilized as a platform, we heard somewhat of a personality coming out of the response saying, "You can say that."
Is this considered one of the platforms?
Following some silence, we heard further footsteps from the same corner of the room, but this time it followed a statement of, "I'm here." While we pushed for this culprit's name, we were greeted with "Hi," but as we continued to pursue a name, we were told to "Shut up." At this point, a strange light was spotted in the corner of the room where the footsteps previously occurred. As the photographer turned back toward the group, this same light could be seen streaking across the room toward the investigators. We did not lose sight of our intention to find out who they were, but instead had one of the investigators' names repeated with Dan. He was seemingly told that they were coming, and that they may have been a servant. Toward the end of our session, the medium felt a stabbing sensation in her back. Right after this experience, we recorded a voice claiming that they warned her and harm you. If this wasn't enough, it was followed by laughter, which ultimately forced us to move on. As we moved back toward the main building, we paused in the Roundhouse where some old trains were situated, just to give guests an idea of the sheer size of the structure. When the facility was active, there would have been a normal slew of activity. This is where the locomotives would have come to be rerouted to different locations and directions. This included to the repair shop behind the building. Directly below the turntable, the original foundation of the first Roundhouse was reused and can still be walked on and explored to this day. The feeling here is electric, almost as if history is still alive. In this humongous, open room, lights have been known to go haywire and shadows have been said to be wandering through as if they were hurrying to get to their next job. We believe that we experienced one of these shadows, even though we did not get any photographic or video evidence. As one of the photographers was inside of one of the passenger cars which was on display, the other investigator called for and began to follow who he thought was the photographer at the far end of the room, walking through the door to access the turntable. As the photographer heard his name being called, he appeared out of the train car, only to astonish the investigator and force him to do a double take. Even though we attempted an EVP and REM pod session here, we didn't receive much evidence aside from that personal experience. During our review process, while the normal flash photography did not produce any paranormal evidence, the thermal camera did show what appeared to be someone looking through the window toward us, as if they were simply standing outside watching us. With limited success in the large open space, we moved further into the building to a lesser-known room, which we simply dubbed the Relic Room. Aside from the fact that the objects have been recovered from the site and have been stored here, there is not much documentation regarding this room. However, one of the more common experiences here is that of a shadow figure which stands in the far corner, perhaps watching over some of these invaluable historic items. We did capture a few names here like Sam and Jane, as well as a few thermal photographs which seem to capture some oddities. One of the thermal images can be seen almost growing throughout the frames. After we realized this image resembled an animal, we captured what sounded like a bark. Other intelligences seemed to come through in the form of knocking sounds, which occurred after we asked directly if we could come forward. Then once again as we heard footsteps. With this, we asked them to come forward once again and heard a strange response which did make some sense to us with, "I'm following you." We heard some further responses to our questions as we asked what this room was used for and captured the word bones. It was as if this was referencing the relics which had been dug up and displayed throughout this current iteration of the room. Another piece of communication came through the Phasma box after we asked if they played in this room in the past and heard a clear yes.
Do you like to play in this room?
While we packed up our gear to move on, there was another thermal image captured of what appears to be a man standing stoically on his own in the corner of the room. Perhaps this was a man sitting behind the desk acting as an overseeing manager. After these moments inside the building, we moved outside to continue the investigation, as well as catch our breath while in the process. In this exterior saw shop, this area is one which saw plenty of activity throughout a singular workday. Employees would typically find themselves here at one point or another. This location is notable for the residual energy of past employees still conducting their day-to-day business. However, some sensitives and mediums have a darker feeling about this place. They typically do not like to come to this location alone, and almost feel a negativity pulling them here. It's not really known what could be lurking in this area, or why this shadowy spot has become such a point of interest and contention for the darkness, but perhaps something occurred here that is still unknown to the public. This energy still lives on far beyond its original occurrence, and during the Civil War the location saw plenty of fighting which occurred on the opposite end of the open field. The darkness felt here could be remnants of death and pure hatred of an emotion which was expended during the vicious fighting during the war. We recorded different types of communication here. It's possible that the majority of this is residual as we heard the sounds of working machinery. However, we also seem to unearth some details of a young girl named Isabel. As we started to put things together, this girl may have disappeared in the woods after being injured. This was realized after we asked if the parents found their child, and we were told the woods.
Did you find her?
They wouldn't.
This was followed by an almost unsettling phrase of fell in the street.
Was she hurt?
Perhaps this was a mistreated slave girl, or even one who was injured in the fatal Irish Brigade incident during the Civil War. This thought process continued after we heard a plea of help her. We discussed the possibility of this girl falling or something else which may have happened to her. As if a direct response to this subject, we captured a quite frightening pushed. We tried to put all this content together in the moment and mentioned the former comment of the woods and heard, "She's worried." This sounded much more of a masculine voice, so naturally we asked who this was and who was speaking to us and heard her father.
Who's the male that keeps talking? Is that your father?
We directly asked if this was referencing Isabel's father and heard a clear and concise confirmation of it is.
Okay, so if that's Isabel's father.
As we moved toward the far side of the building, nearest to the field behind it, we captured what sounded like a drum beat, followed by the command of march. As this occurred, we captured a photograph that showed a light anomaly in the field next to our group of investigators, perhaps of a fog similar to that of the tales of former paranormal activity. Following the march command and the drum beat, we were understandably drawn to this large open field which stretched far and away from the safety of the building. Across the field is where the Civil War encampments were laid out, and just beyond that is where some of the fighting occurred. Surely there were deaths in this field, as the area itself changed hands 37 times. Those battles surely led to bloodshed across the area. The field has been a location where fogs and smoke have been noticed, even to the passing car, which would report seeing something burning in the open field as they drove by. Horse hooves and shouting have been recorded here in the dead of night as battles still rage on. As we conducted some Phasma box and REM pod sessions here, we felt as if we were not welcomed. This was possibly as simple as our group being outsiders to the area. We did record some negatively charged choice words here, such as one that I cannot repeat here. And other words of disagreement while we attempted to communicate with them in the form of no, which was heard twice after we asked them if it was okay to ask them some questions. At some points, we were actually called for help by some unforeseen force, with need help and help.
Thank you.
After coming to a brick wall dead end in the field, and being stopped and questioned by the cops as to our intentions in the old, unoccupied building, we opted to head back inside and stopped off in the medicine shop. This ultimately became our final stop for the evening, unbeknownst to us at the time. This room is located off of the rear, large open space where we set up our main console. It is currently filled with old machinery which is on display as it would have been back in the day when the Roundhouse was in operation. This area leads directly to the saw shop, so there's no doubt that this spot saw a fair share of activity when the Roundhouse was in full swing, even if just for employees to pass through in each direction. Rumor has told of shadows being seen wandering back and forth here, and the machines sounding on as if they were still functioning. We simply conducted an EVP session here, even though the area had made us uneasy earlier in the night while setting up our cameras and just passing through. The environment seemed to be completely altered by the time we made it here to investigate. We did not capture anything out of the ordinary, however we did spot some fast-moving lights in the far corner as if something was hiding behind the machinery and randomly peeking out to look at us. Whether we wore them out, or we ran out of energy to provide, or they just wanted to be left alone for the night, we opted to pack it up and call it a night. During our time on the property, and even stretching a few days after, the investigators had extreme dry mouth and were overly thirsty. Upon researching this a little, it said that Civil War-era spirits are sometimes associated with scents like lilacs, as well as a bitter taste or dry mouth. All of these were associated with the final moments of those dying. The lilacs were scents of burial practices to make the scent of death not make those who survived constantly sick. The dry mouth is associated with those soldiers who were shot and dying. Supposedly, their final requests were that of wanting a drink of water. After we reviewed the evidence gathered from our paranormal investigation of the Martinsburg Roundhouse, we confidently conclude that the historic rail yard is a host to many energies throughout the property. While some of the more popular stories fell by their wayside, such as smoke, fog, and the horse hoof noises, others came through in spectacular fashion, giving us voices, names, and communication in different areas. Specifically, the second floor of the bridge building, the relic room, the field, and the saw shop. These more active locations in the Martinsburg Roundhouse gave us an array of energies and atmospheric changes. The second floor of the bridge building felt heavier. Add to it that the medium was scratched here, and we were told that she was warned. It all added up to a darker feeling. Both the field and saw shop seemed tamer, but at the same time we felt unwanted and felt as if we were out of place, as though we simply did not belong. These were both ripe with energies who tried to force us out, but also shared residual experiences while we spent time there. The relic room seemed relatively peaceful and welcoming. Whether it was what felt and sounded like a guard dog trusting us, or the quiet soul left in the corner to watch over the historic artifacts in the afterlife. By the end of the night, it seemed like we had experienced the extent of the energy that the old rail yard had stored up. By the time we made it to the medicine shop to end the night, almost all of the activity ceased. The activity at the Martinsburg Roundhouse has reached back in time from high points of the town's boom before the Civil War to the bloody history of that very Civil War and the overworked slaves during that time. This stretched to the town's rise from literal ashes of the burnt-down rail yard. There are so many different memories and activities that seem to be stuck here, like the hard-working employees of Martinsburg and the fun-loving children and pets. The darkness also seems to be hidden here in the form of a woman of the night, possibly an abusive man, such as a father or slave driver, and who seeks shelter outside the saw shop. The tragedy of the Civil War is seemingly an endless loop, replaying battles and bloodshed of the time period by marching across the open field and reliving their tragic ends. Regardless of the type of hauntings experienced, it's safe to say that the Martinsburg Roundhouse is home to some of the most interesting variety of energies known to haunt any single location.